In this one, we're going to be looking at a very special native Linux game called Rocks and Diamonds. It's special because it was one of the very first native Linux games dating all the way back to 1995, but it's also special because it was one of the very first Linux games I ever reviewed on this channel. So believe it or not, Rocks and Diamonds is an old game from the 90s and it's still getting updates today. Version 4.2.1 released just a couple days ago with bug fixes and some new features. If you want to just poke around at Rocks and Diamonds without committing to a full install, you can play it right now from the website in your browser. Anyway though, at its core, Rocks and Diamonds is just a Boulder Dash clone, but if you're like me and you've never played OG Boulder Dash, Rocks and Diamonds is really its own thing. I kind of see it more of a game engine with tile sets and some other things to allow people to make their own games and levels that end up being similar to Boulder Dash, Superplex, and Sukoban, and tons of other games. And when I say tons of other games, I mean like games like Space Invaders or Zelda clones. Like there's a lot you can do with this. It's kind of nuts. But in terms of gameplay, it depends entirely on the level set you're playing. So like the default level set is basically Boulder Dash. You move through dirt, collecting gems and avoiding dangers and obstacles, such as rocks that fall if you dig underneath them. Once you collect all the gems, a door opens and you go through it. It's a puzzle game, basically. There's a scoring system, but all of the scores are saved locally, and I don't see a way of syncing them to a cloud or a website or something, so you can't really easily compare them with the rest of the internet, so it's kind of pointless. If you've played other puzzle games like Sukoban and Superplex, you'll know what to expect here. Folks my vintage might be more familiar with Chip's Challenge, which was inspired by the same games as Rocks and Diamonds. There's supposedly like 50,000 custom levels for this game, so I wouldn't be surprised at all if somebody remade Chip's Challenge in Rocks and Diamonds. In terms of graphics, it's about on par with what I would expect from an old Linux game. The default player sprite looks like an absolute dork, but the level sets can make you look a bit different, for better and worse. And everything's a tile, but the textures are alright, the typefaces are in theme, and nothing looks out of place, it all looks fine. For such an old game, the graphics scale really well to modern resolutions. Remember, this came out in like 95, so the idea of 1080p was just like not there. But honestly, the game looks pretty good. And the whole soundscape, especially the music, like the soundtrack, oh man, it's really good. A couple of things I didn't talk about in the original review was the editor, and platforms like Rocks and Diamonds will run on. The level editor is pretty in-depth. If you're not feeling terribly inspired, you can pick from existing levels to edit and just make your own from them. And I can totally see why there are so many community maps, because the editor is really easy to use. And Rocks and Diamonds is written in C, so it's portable to a bunch of different platforms. So of course there's Windows, Linux, and Mac, but there's also Android and Fire TV. There's even options in the game to enable touch support, so yeah. There's not really anything in particular I didn't like about the game. It's not really my style. I think that it's more of like a nostalgic thing if you like games like Boulder Dash, which were really popular like in the 80s on Amigas and other systems. And the community levels in the game are really fun, but honestly, at its core, the game is just kind of a puzzle game, so if that's your style, then you'll like the game, but if not, then it might be just kind of a novelty. But regardless, I still think it's worth a try. For being such a venerable game and one of the very first games for Linux, I think it deserves some extra credit. If you consider yourself a Linux gamer, why don't you give Rocks and Diamonds a try just to see where it all started?